When I was a little boy, I ran everywhere. Surprise, surprise. It's kind of what little boys do. And my mother would constantly be calling my name, saying, Joshua, slow down. Joshua, stop. And one day at my home where I grew up, 13820 Madison Street in Miami, Florida, there's a little walkway up to our porch, and it was just one step up to the front door, and I was running as fast as I could, and I tripped right before I got to that step, and I hit my chin on that step, and my teeth sank through my tongue, almost all the way through, and it was not good. I would love to say that that lesson, along with many others, have helped me to slow down. But that is not the case. As a matter of fact, just as a moment of confession, I've always had issues with my pace, and I still do. And often I drive a little bit impatiently. My wife is testifying right now. I can be impatient with people at times. I often eat a little bit too fast. And in full transparency, I would probably say that this might be one of my top issues in life. This issue with having patience. Now, that's not the case for all things. Like, there are certain areas and there's certain times when I do exercise good patience and good pace. But I am very inconsistent in this area, very inconsistent when it comes to patience. And this is the fruit of the Spirit that we are talking about this weekend as we continue this series that we've been in called Elements, where we are talking about the fruits of the Spirit that's outlined in the book of Galatians. And so now this weekend we're talking about maybe one of the unsexy fruits that we call patience. Now, the temptation for me, as I think about the 3+ decades that I have struggled with this, almost 4 decades that I've struggled with this issue of patience, I could just say, well, like this is just who I am. This is just what I do. And for those of you who know me or know a little bit about me, you know that I love assessments. So things like the Enneagram and Myers-Briggs, and Strength Finders 2.0. Some of you are taking those assessments. You know about those. I'm actually certified in a couple of them. And so when I think about, like, this is just who I am, I actually think about my top 5 in Strength Finders, which Activator is in my top 5. And it seems to go along and confirm with maybe why I am impatient. Let me just read for you a portion of the description of what it says about Activator. We'll put it up on the screen for you. It says, you are impatient for action. Only action can make things happen. Only action leads to performance. One decision is made, you cannot not act. Others may worry that there are still some things we don't know. But this doesn't seem to slow you. You are not going to sit around waiting until all the lights have turned green. You believe that action is the best device for learning. You make a decision, you take action, you look at the result, and you learn. This is spot on for me. But here's the thing, though. When I zoom out and I really think about this, it's only a strength for me when my motives are pure and my mission is not driven by my ambition. That's when it's actually a strength at its purest. Now, unfortunately for me and many of us, our world celebrates fast pace, being first, speed, and we say patience is a virtue, but it really is not, because we don't celebrate patience. And our conditioning is more geared towards impatience, making this fruit of the Spirit that we're talking about this weekend, patience, not really a high value to us. We cool with love and, I like joy and peace. Not really sure about patience, right? And I think one of the reasons for that, or one of the motivations for us, is the fear of missing out. If I don't make this decision or do this thing now, what am I going to miss out on? And I think part of the motivation there is tied to the fact that we think that it's all on us. Whatever the situation is or whatever we find ourselves in, we think that it's on us. And as I mentioned earlier, we just really invite God into our mission to help us accomplish the things that we want or we're pursuing. And so putting our trust in the divine, or in his will or in his providence, it might not equal the result that we like or we want. And I should also throw out this other thing, that furthermore, waiting is sometimes agonizing. And I just want to see a show of hands for those of you who love suffering. No one loves to suffer. I'm reminded of this when I think about 1 Samuel 24, that we're going to dive into right now, just a few verses. I started my Bible reading this year in the book of 1 Samuel, and the book actually opens with a story of a woman named Hannah who is patiently seeking God for years, and God hears her and blesses her. But the rest of the book is really filled with these examples of impatience. There's one passage that I think highlights what patience and trust in God is supposed to look like for us. There's a young man named David. He's a shepherd boy. He's been anointed to be the next king of Israel. God has rejected Saul, the current king, in part because he was impatient and disobedient. David has been anointed the next king, and he now works for Saul, the current king. I don't know how that necessarily works out, but that's the case. And then Saul becomes jealous because David, his notoriety grows. He actually hits a time when he basically goes viral, because he defeats this giant named Goliath, and everyone is singing David's praises, and they're like, Saul was chased 1,000, and David chased 10,000, and Saul is like, I'm supposed to be the man. And so with some of his men, David goes on the run, and he's hiding because Saul is trying to kill him, and Saul has tried to kill him twice while they were in the house together by throwing a spear at him. And then an opportunity falls into the lap of David. It must be God. And so let's pick up the story right here in verse number 3 in 1 Samuel 24. Again, we'll have it up here on the screen for you. It says, when Saul came to the sheep pens along the road, a cave was there. He went in to relieve himself. He's going to use the bathroom. David and his men were staying in the recesses of the cave. So they said to him, look, this is the day the Lord told you about. I will hand your enemy over to you so you can do to him whatever you desire. Then David got up and secretly cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Afterward, David's conscience bothered him because he had cut off the corner of Saul's robe. He said to his men, as the Lord is my witness, I would never do such a thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed. I will never lift my hand against him, since he is the Lord's anointed. with these words, David persuaded his men, and he did not let them rise up against Saul. I want to just use for a subject this weekend for this message, the discipline of trusting God. The discipline of trusting God, which I believe is what this fruit of the Spirit, patience, is all about. It's about reflecting in the life of the believer our trust in God. God, I'm going to wait on you. This passage of scripture that we just read is one of my favorite passages of scripture. And it's a fascinating moment for me. I'm totally captivated by it because it's very confusing to me. It's confusing to me because we all know we've had the opportunity where there was a hater or there was an accuser or there was an enemy, and we've had the opportunity to put them in their place. They've wronged us. They've said something about us. They've hurt us. And the perfect opportunity just showed up, or we created it, to show them, to get back at them, to right what we felt like was wrong. Or maybe you're kinder and nicer than us, and that's not the case, but you've had some scenarios in your life where you've been praying for a thing, you've been seeking for a thing, and it seemed like, oh, this is the moment. All of the boxes are lined up. Everything just is coming together just smoothly like I thought. This must be God. When will I get another opportunity? I better jump on this right now. In those moments, it's difficult to not seize the moment because everything looks as though it is lined up. And who wants to miss out on a good opportunity, right? But I've got a question for you. What if seizing the good opportunity causes us to miss the God opportunity? What if what we're trying to jump on now forfeits what is bigger and better and greater for us in the future? This is why I believe patience is named as a fruit of the Spirit, because it helps us to develop trust in God's will and providence and not our own. So I think there are two things, if you're taking notes, that we can pull out from this story from David that we can apply to our lives. And so the first one is found in verse number 4, and it's this: we must resist the perspective of they. If we're going to trust God, we've got to resist the perspective of they. David's men, they said, David, this is the opportunity, bro. This is it. He right there. We got to get him. And from their perspective, it all made sense. David is already king anyway. God has anointed him to be the next king. There's no secret. And if we're being honest, a lot of our decision making is influenced by who or what is loudest in our ear. And often the perspective of others around us is not about you, it's about them. It's about what they would do. It's about what they think. We are great projectionists. If it was me, I would. That's pretty much how it works. And sometimes it causes us to miss the God ideas because we're settling for the good ideas that we've been encouraged to settle on by the people or the influences around us. But what God has for us is greater and better, even though we might not be able to see it or feel it in this moment. I remember just thinking back that in my brief NFL career, there was a time when I was transitioning teams. And at the time, I was with the Washington, what are they now? Commanders. Yeah, they weren't the Commanders then, obviously. But I was with Washington, and I gotten released, and I worked out for another team, a team out west. And one of the coaches there was one of my coaches in Washington, and so I got an opportunity to go and work out there, and I was really excited about it. And I thought that that was going to be a good deal for me. And then I had another team, and I worked out for them as well. And I wasn't sure what to do. And this other team offered me a contract, but I really wanted to go out west. And so I remember calling this coach and saying, hey, what should I do? I'm seeking the perspective of they, What should I do? I didn't pray about it. I didn't ask God, what do you think? I was anxious and I was impatient. And I remember him saying, a bird in hand is better than two in the bush. The old school saying right there. Basically, he said, you better sign that contract that's on the table. And I did that, and I believe it was a catalyst to short-circuiting my career. Now, I've embraced God's providence in it because I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and the path that I was on, I'm happy with. But I believe that was a turning point for me in my life. I didn't exercise patience. David in this story, he's tempted, and he cuts off a corner of Saul's robe. Now, that must have been a really, really sharp sword for him to cut off the robe and he not feel it. But he cuts it off, and immediately he regrets it. And he regrets it because he knows he doesn't have the right thought. He's not thinking the right way. Can I ask you a question? Who or what is in your ear regularly? Where are you taking your influences from? Where are you taking your cues from? How have you conditioned yourself when things come up in your life to figure out what direction you should go? Oftentimes, praying and seeking God is at the bottom of it. I have done all that I can do. Now, God, listen, I'm out here working. I need you to come through. That's typically how we roll. This is why the Apostle Paul, who wrote the majority of the New Testament, and he's writing to a bunch of Jesus followers all over Asia Minor, and he says to them regularly, and I'll paraphrase, but he talks to them about following God's Spirit, saying walk according to the Spirit, not the flesh, because they have two different agendas. What I feel like doing and what I want to do ain't always what I should do. They got separate agendas. And he says we must stay in step with the Spirit. That's how we grow the fruit of the Spirit. Well, practically, how do we do that? Well, this is about strengthening our relationship with God. Because if we're going to step outside of ourselves and sometimes make decisions against ourselves, we need a different kind of strength. We need a spiritual strength because we can't resist if we're not strong. And David is only able to resist because of his relationship with God, his commitment and his regular communion with God. If you read through 1 Samuel and I guess half of 2 Samuel, you will see David constantly asking God, should I go here? Should I attack? Should I stay? Should I move? That was how he was conditioned. And this is how he was able to resist. And can I just put one little caveat in there too? We grow and we're able to help produce these fruits of the Spirit in our lives, and specifically as it relates to patience and trusting God. Yes, by developing and cultivating our relationship with God, but also those in our community and those who we are in personal relationship with. So number one, if we're going to exercise the discipline of trusting God, we have to resist the perspective of they. Number two, we need to remember that God is in control. This is in verse 6. Listen to David's language, which shows his submission to God's authority. Listen to what he says to his men. As the Lord is my witness, I would never do such a thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed. I would never lift my hand against him, since he is the Lord's anointed. Listen, there have been situations in my life and people have hurt me and people have said some stuff to me. I don't know that I'm responding like David. And even thinking in my mind, this is the Lord's anointed, or this is God's child, or this person is created in the image of God. No, I'm not always thinking that way. This shows David's spiritual maturity and that he trusts God at work in his life. David knows that Saul is still the king. even though he's been anointed to be the next king. But he understands it's not his place to remove him, even though Saul is pursuing him. Do you know why we sometimes take matters into our own hands? It's because we think we are in control, and we think that it's up to us. We think that if it's going to happen, I need to make it happen. How many inspirational videos have you seen? If you're going to make it happen, you got to make it happen. Yes, there's an aspect to where you need to be invested, but it's not all on you. And the lack of patience causes premature movement. And it's premature because, hey, we're not too removed from our 2- and 3-year-old selves. We want what we want when we want it. For whatever reason we want it. It don't matter. We want it. There was a friend that I was talking to in the fall, and he's a retired lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. I love talking to those guys, just the way they think, and I've had the privilege of just being around a lot of high-level military officers, and so Doug and I were talking, and he was just kind of giving me a recap on some things, and so he had a little rebellious moment with one of his sons, and he said, I just told him. He said, I want you to go up to your room, and I want you to grab everything that you have attained on your own. Anything that you have that has been purchased or is related to you having it as a result of my resources, you can leave it on your way out because it belongs to me. And as long as you are in this house, you are under my authority. His son left, but he came back real quick because he realized who was actually in control, and he apologized. And sometimes we act the same way. We do the same thing. And the old school folks back in the day, particularly in the African-American culture, we would say things like, you're smelling yourself, huh? You're starting to feel like, okay, you the man, you the woman, or whatever the case may be. But can I just tell you something? Don't cut your future off for a temporary frustration. Don't cut your future off for a temporary frustration. Yes, David was running. Yes, it was frustrating. Yes, it didn't make any sense. Why does he have to be the one to show restraint? He hasn't done anything wrong. But if he acts, he is forfeiting what God has for him in the future. Don't try to take control when you don't have authority to do so. Let me see if I can land the plane for us like this, and we'll be out of here. One other thing that I want to leave with us regarding this story that I haven't touched on is this, and you have to, I want to just encourage you to just back up a couple of chapters, okay, from 1 Samuel 24, and just read the lead up to this point, all right? You can even really start when David is anointed king, and you can just read forward. And you can just see, like, David has not done anything wrong. David didn't even ask to be king. He's out in the field tending sheep, minding his business, and he gets called in to be anointed. So he hadn't asked for any of this. He's following God. He's the bigger person, yet he's the one who is experiencing hell. He's the one who's suffering. Any of y'all ever felt like that? Like, I didn't even ask for this. I'm trying to be the bigger person. I'm trying to be the one to settle it, but I feel like I'm the one that's catching hell. I'm the one that's suffering. The Greek word for patience in the New Testament also means long suffering. One thing I know that we don't want to do, as I already mentioned earlier, is we don't want to suffer. No one is signing up to suffer. And as a matter of fact, our entire world is built around and promoted around this idea of comfort, convenience, and control. Everything. That's how it's marketed to us. That's how we're conditioned to pursue our lives based on those three things. And none of those things are conducive to producing the fruit of the Spirit, patience. None of them. But patience is the fruit of the Spirit because long suffering in our lives produces rich soil. You know how I know that's true? When you have gone through something and you understand it better because you've gone through it, you have a different perspective. You have another level of compassion. We've even been convicted before when we've criticized others for things that they've gone through, and then we go through and we're like, now I understand. That's what long suffering does, and it elevates our perspective. But it also helps to produce trust in our relationship with God. And this is why David could write in Psalm 138, God will perfect everything that concerns you, because David lived that and he saw that. This fruit of the Spirit called patience, it allows God to be our protector and also our provider. David let Saul walk out of that cave. But then he calls out to him and he bows down. He said, Saul. And Saul turns around and he bows before him, showing this man honor who's tried to kill him. And this is what he said in verse 12 and verse 15. We didn't read these verses, but I'm going to just read it to you. He says, may the Lord judge between me and you, and may the Lord take vengeance on you for me, but my hand will never be against you. Verse 15, may the Lord be judge and decide between you and me. May he take notice and plead my case and deliver me from you. Saul just basically said, David, you're a better man than me. Made a promise that he wouldn't pursue him anymore. And guess what? Pursued him again. And David did the same thing again. Tiptoed in his camp, rolled up on him, went back and said, again, surprise. At some point, we got to not do this. He's exemplifying great patience. And I just wonder what that would look like in our culture right now. If someone says something that we don't like, or someone has a different idea, that we just exercise a certain level of patience and graciousness to not attack them or to defend our point or our perspective. James said, if you go back a couple of messages where we talked about joy, which is one of the fruit of the Spirit, James says that we should have this joy perspective, and he says that we should count everything that we go through, we should count it all joy, which nobody does, James. But this is what he says we should do. Why? Because we need to let perseverance do its work. One of the definitions for patience is perseverance. So it's doing something. It's producing something in us. Even though it doesn't feel good in the moment. Let me ask you this. What if God is doing something through this situation that you're in that's causing you to exercise patience? What if God is doing something in and through you, not for now, but for future generations? Because we see that Jesus comes through the line of David. And Jesus is ultimately the one that shows us what it means to exercise patience and long suffering and what that looks like. Who possesses all power known to man, but yet lays it down and humbles himself? Jesus. Who allows themselves to be beaten and to suffer and to be hung on the cross, which was the most heinous death you could have at that time. It was because of his relationship and his love for all of creation. And it was the depth of his relationship that allowed him to be disciplined in that moment and trust God. And it is the same for us. It is the depth of our relationship with God that will show us how disciplined we can be in trusting God. And that's what it means to have this fruit of the Spirit called patience. And this is what God is calling us to, and we see in the life of David.